So this is Louis, and unfortunately, I am under the two conditions that are the worst for having to record what should be a decent video for my channel. It's the subscribe star video of the month, even though I haven't done one of these in quite a few months, and I apologize for that, because you guys are paying for it, but unfortunately, circumstances are what they are, and I am under the two conditions that I really shouldn't be when I'm trying to record something like this, where I have no script, I accidentally deleted my script, and I'm also on my second cup of coffee, so I'm flying high. I am, that reminds me of Black Sabbath, but more importantly, not flying high, which I believe is, I forget what record that is, what record that is, but more importantly, it's like Snowblind. What's the lyric? My eyes are blind, but I can see. My eyes are blind, but I can see. Those are the conditions that I'm currently under, okay? I might be blinded, but I can still see. We're going to be talking about censorship. And I'm not going to be getting particularly angry in this. I recorded a commentary months ago, I believe at this point, which is still sitting on my desktop because it's one of the angriest rants that I've done in quite a long time. And it's in relation to the video game industry. And it's the fact that one of the reasons why we have this issue of censorship is that so many developers are just fedora tippers. Like, they are your boomer millennials, or maybe like young Gen Xers. They seem to range from like mid 40s and then to like the 30s. Like, that seems to be the range for a lot of these devs, and they're just fedora tippers. Like, they're just so cucked out of their minds. Like, they're so pussy whipped. In many cases, not even married, where they develop their games in a way now that was just anathema to the way that it was back then. And I can give you examples of Grand Theft Auto Vice City, of Duke Nukem 3D, of the two Godfather games, the Scarface game. There were so many games in the 90s and in the early 2000s that had titillation. Easter eggs are just titillation for the sake of titillation in them. There were so many Western games that had titillation in them. You had strip clubs, you had brothels, you had, Duke Nukem handing a stripper 100 and she, shows you her pixelated tits. There was so much titillation back in the day just for the sake of fun. And that has all been wiped away. And people want to say, oh no, it's the corporations, it's EA, it's the investors. And that's bullshit. It's the devs. They're just pussy whipped. They're just fedora tippers. They have completely betrayed the boys' club that gaming once was for the sake of trying to appeal to a phantom audience that doesn't exist. But they know this. They know this. And that was the rant that I recorded, was my frustration with the fact that you have intelligent people that are far more skilled than I am, developing, games of some quality, and they fundamentally don't understand their own industry. And it isn't because they're stupid or because they're unskilled or incompetent. The reason they're incompetent is because they are just so controlled. They are just under the weight of their own self-censorship, of their own compulsive need to pander to feminists, to women in some degree that are, may not be actual feminists, but are just normie women that believe that they should be pandered to, even though they don't play these games. They have no real interest in playing gross, icky shooters where you kill people and people explode. And the women that are interested in that, they're on my side. They're not on the side of the pearl-clutching people that aren't playing these games and the cucklord developers that pander to these people. At some point, apropos of nothing, I'm just going to upload that commentary, and if you don't like it, just I guess unsubscribe, because it's not normally what I upload. But it is an actually felt frustration with this industry, which is having to grapple with the consequences of their own actions and being unable to understand that what they're doing is, in essence, undermining everything that they should believe in, everything that they should stand for, everything that is a basic requirement of being involved in an artistic field. They are being controlled by outsiders that do not play their games, and they are seemingly powerless to fight against it. And those developers that I know are within the industry, they don't believe in any of this, that are, for a lack of a better way of putting it, red-pilled or woke to the actual problem, they're just pussies. And I've had actually a couple emails where people, spoke against me and were trying to, do what would it be called? A takedown of me, where they just go line by line and try to refute what I've said about the industry and that. And it's like, yeah, you're doing that still anonymously. You're not telling me your name. I've only had a couple devs ever reach out to me that have given me their names and have verified where they work from, because it was from a work email. So it was easy to verify that it was them. But for the people that have even sent me messages and have complained to me about, oh, well, Louis, you don't know the half of it, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you're doing all this shit from behind a mask. And it is because, like it is with me, although less and less now, if you speak out, you're going to be fucking fired. You're going to get hounded out of the industry just like James Damore, because the gaming industry might be even worse than the tech industry in terms of, punishment for your beliefs. So don't get on my ass about how, oh, well, Louis, you don't really understand. Oh, you're claiming that we're all a bunch of fedora-tipping pussies, but really that's not how it is. We just censor our artwork and censor our work for the sake of the fact that we're afraid to lose our jobs. You don't understand, Louis. I got a family. I got kids. Which is nothing more than a gimmick from WWE, that one wrestler. That was his entire gimmick for like a year. That's who you are. You're a joke. So, I'm tempted to, I don't even have it anymore, but I'm tempted to talk about some of the emails that I've gotten, because I did a video, or I said something on a stream a while ago where I just dumped on gaming devs. I think it was a video where I said that these people are just freaking cowards and that they're willing to betray everything that they should believe in for the sake of their own safety, personal safety, and just their fear of even just inter-office politics, that being the worst case scenario for them, or the best case even. They're just so desperately afraid of everyone around them in the industry that they just keep their mouths shut, even though they know what's going on is morally wrong and they hate it. I'm sorry if I don't feel for you because you're a fucking coward and you can't stand up for what you believe in. Because you can't even do it anonymously. I've already said this before, but you can't even say this publicly, anonymously. You have to tell me privately, but anonymously. You guys are cowards. What I'm going to do before we actually delve into this article talking about the censorship policy on the PlayStation 4, and I could speak a little bit about the Nintendo Switch, because the Nintendo Switch and Nintendo is actually taking advantage of the censorship policy from Sony and is allowing a lot more titillation games on their platform, unlike Steam, which is still just half-assing it. Basically picking and choosing which game they want to ban and which they want to allow. Sony is taking it up to a whole new level. And I mean that. Like, this is completely different to what's happening on Steam, where Steam is just unfairly enforcing these standards. With Sony, they are outright admitting defeat. They are outright saying what I've been saying for an extremely long time and have gotten pushback from people that I would otherwise respect, but don't really understand, at least to the degree that this is such a problem.
I feel like for the most part, these games are within an acceptable range. I get that there are certain lines that have to be drawn, but...
Wrong.
That is absolutely
wrong.
Proved over and over again.
Wrong.
He actually had...
I will show you the quotations that I've made in the past about this particular issue, and the fact that, and I'm sorry to the couple people that don't like me talking about the fact that there were cases in which I was correct. I'm not doing so for the sake of getting your money or bragging, trying to reassure myself or anything like that. I'm not doing anything like that. I'm not doing any of this for the sake of trying to prop myself up. If I had 1 million subs, maybe then you could expect I'd have a fucking ego. But, I don't do any of this for the sake of bragging. It's just to show you that what I've been saying for the past 5 years has actually reached the end state. We are now at the point that I warned we would be. We are now seeing something written in black and white, recognized as an official policy at what is it? One of the big four publishers, one of the big four, platforms, Xbox, PlayStation, Steam, and Nintendo. This is one of the big ones with Sony. And their official policy, their official codified policy is we're going to look at games on a case-by-case basis for which are allowed on our platform and which are not, as determined by the individual censor. I warned that this is what we were leading up to. And what this is just an admission of defeat. This is the emperor with no clothes. This is you just standing buck naked before everyone. And I can't even believe that more people are not astounded at this kind of admission. You don't have a policy when what you're saying is that every game is going to be treated subjectively. That's not a policy. I can't even imagine how unbelievably compromised I would be as someone involved in an artistic medium to ever admit that. How philosophically bankrupt, morally bankrupt I would have to be to, with a straight face, say that that is our official policy. It is incomprehensible to me what kind of person could ever say this and not bow their head in shame for the sake of, like I say, how unbelievably intellectually bankrupt you are. This is a standard by which that a totalitarian government would operate, where we all know what's going to be censored, we all know what's going to be banned and what isn't, and it's the same with what's going on with Steam, where you have all these gay furry games, these hardcore gay furry games and all the rest of it, boys love games that are in a school setting involving underage boys. That's all greenlit, fast as possible, put it on the platform, and everything else that involves girls, whether it's lesbian or straight, romance or sex, it is just a matter of, does it get through because that day the censor says yes? Because otherwise, it's just flip of the coin, 50-50. If that's the content in your game, especially if it's Japanese, I would say you probably have a 25% chance at that point if it gets on Steam. With Sony, what was a Japanese company, that is their policy now. It is openly saying that the individual censor is actually going to determine what is on the platform, case by case. That is utterly ridiculous. And by the way, that isn't a platform. You are a publisher now. You are a publisher. When you curate every single game, you completely dispense with the ESRB, another ratings board, a proxy for your censorship or something else, when you are yourself curating every single thing that is on your platform. You are a publisher. And you should be legally liable as such. But in the clown world in which we live, that is just not the case. We continue to sit and abide with these companies proclaiming themselves to be neutral platforms, while at the same time saying that when it comes to every single game on their platform, they will determine individually which game is allowed and which isn't, regardless of any other factors. It is purely left up to the judgment of individual censors that are operating on a completely incoherent worldview. This is not the free market. This is the market of a publisher. And all the game makers, all the companies, all the devs that keep their mouths shut, they are, in fact, columnists. They are, in fact, employees of that publisher. They are, in fact, powerless as it relates to the publication of their works on those so-called platforms. From that entity, let's say. Because I keep having to it's just natural to say YouTube's a platform, Facebook's a platform, PlayStation's a platform, when none of those things are true. They're all legally platforms, but in reality, no, none of them are actually platforms anymore. Steam is not a platform anymore. If they just host games and they just leave arbitration of ratings to another group, a so-called independent group, then they are a platform. If Twitter allows every tweet except for those taken down or ordered to be taken down by law enforcement, then it's a platform. When the actual so-called platform is micromanaging and monitoring and removing content in its own right, where it's hiring thousands upon thousands of people to micromanage the individual, person's account on a platform, you are no longer a platform. You are a publisher. When you have a goddamn editor, you are not a platform. And so, what we're going to listen to, and I apologize because I've had people say that they don't want me to do this, but it needs to be said that I talked about this. I said that this is where things were leading, and we have reached that destination. There is no competency. There's never going to be a there's never going to be a law, and there's never going to be an enforcement mechanism that can actually enforce what I'm discussing here, what I'm talking about. It will never exist. It is inconceivable because it has never existed. Never in the history of human civilization has there ever been a law that is accurately and fairly enforced art regulation. Never. And there never will be. Because it's even more subjective than speech. This is one of my big issues with this is even with speech, I find that the enforcement of it to be laughably absurd, but even speech is more objective to regulate against than art. Art is purely perception-based, and that's it. And it makes it absolutely ridiculous to me that anyone could even qualify this to say that. And that's why I say there is no defense of this. This is indefensible. Because it's all going to be perception-based of who the censor is. Who's the one that pulls the trigger and imprisons somebody. That's going to be whose standard by which someone is prosecuted. I'm not even going to get into the professional censor boards, okay? Just as it relates to Steam, they don't have any objective standard because this is the thing. There is no objective standard. There is no actual enforceable standard. It is always going to be case by case. It is always going to be what goes under the radar, what artists can get away with, versus the SJWs and the censors clamor about something being banned, and then Steam reacts and then bans it. They admit themselves, and I'll try to find this, of what article I found this from Steam itself, Valve, just admitting that it's like, yeah, it's a case-by-case basis, and it's this, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If we hear the squeaking, we're just going to burn some books to make it stop. That isn't any kind of moral defense for what you're doing, Valve. That isn't any kind of defense. And I'm going to have to calm myself down here for the sake of making this, not an hour-long rant about how ridiculous Valve is as a platform and as a company. Especially being that they are former devs now. They used to make games before they sold games. You would think that anyone working at Valve could conceivably have an understanding for why this is morally indefensible, but this is the problem, is that they're like most people. They don't have any reason why. It's like, oh, well, no, Louis, the moderate position is you just ban some things. That's the moderate position. That's the centrist position. You just ban some things based on the shrieking of ideologues. These so-called standards for what is acceptable on their platform, half the shit that they promote would violate these standards if they actually enforce them evenly, which they don't. And I've already said many times in the past, and I've debated people on this point, and they can't say shit to me because they know I'm right, that as it relates to any kind of standard that you would have on art, you're never going to fucking fairly enforce it. It's always going to be subjective. It's always going to be catering to the whims of people shouting to you about it. There's going to be plenty more that's going under the radar that you're not noticing that is going to just be there. Or you're just going to actively promote and be a fucking hypocrite about. With that said, one of the things that I find most frustrating about this is just how many games this affects. And the fact that another portion of what I was right about entirely was the people that came back on me that said that there was a buffer between the West and the East and that there was no real way to get to the Japanese developers. And that has proven to be false. Because even with companies like Atlas, This is not a developer that goes out of its way to create controversy in terms of its games, and it deals with a few heavy subjects now and then, mostly just exaggerated drama. But even in the case of feel-good, optimistic, pseudo-dark but ultimately good-natured Atlas, even with them, they're allowing their games to be censored. If the rumors that are being speculated about, and I have yet to see any real confirmation about the new iteration of Catherine, the localization that's happening for that game, I've yet to actually see this confirmed specifically from Atlas. And if it has been, I haven't seen it. But the most frustrating part is that even with old games, they're now being censored to bring them up with the ridiculous and contradictory moral standard of people right now. This game is several years old, but the localization team is apparently changing aspects of the game for the sake of contemporary politics, meaning right now. This snapshot in history, not a month ago, not a month from now, literally right now, the end of May 2019. This is an untenable position. We cannot do this. We cannot have video games that if they're going to be repurposed or repackaged or resold, that they're going to have to be edited. You're just going to have to remove aspects of the game, lines of dialogue, names, and that sort of thing from Catherine, allegedly, for the sake of playing up to an audience that are a bunch of mental defectives. I can't help but say that I don't think we should be listening to the hand-wringing of people that are self-diagnosed mental defectives, to be more polite than I wish to be on the matter. I don't really care what someone with a mental illness believes. You're not mentally right. You're not mentally sound. What does it matter to me what you think? Why would we use people that are not right in the mind, in the head? Why would we use them as the standard for normalcy? This isn't normal. This isn't right. This isn't moral. This is phobic, and this is ist, and this is that. And it's like, why would we listen to you? You're a mental defective. You're some neat, living alone, unhappy, unhealthy. Why would we listen to you about anything? And I think that, unfortunately, this is the thing that I spoke about originally. This is the issue of Fedora tipping devs. They just can't embrace the Nietzschean or Darwinian way of looking at life, of who gives a goddamn what the weak think? Who gives a goddamn what the parasites think? Who gives a damn what somebody thinks when they are living off of my dollar? Why should I care what they think? Their entire basis of existence is because of my funding of their terrible lifestyle. And I don't understand why we care about the opinion of mentally defective, broke neets, unhealthy people. Why do we care about their opinions? And there's plenty of neckbeard basement dwellers, guys that are out of shape in their 20s and 30s, playing video games obsessively, and I'm not too far off from that myself. Why is it that even though we might not be perfectly healthy and we might be eccentric to some degree, why are we the bane of all existence? Why are we just recognized recently as having a mental disorder because we're gamers? Why are we the mental defectives that are ignored and lambasted? And I know how this is going to sound like, oh, we live in a society, clown image, gamers rise up. Like, I get it. But my point is that that's the meme. And yet these other people that are calling for these things to be changed, they are in reality those things. They're in reality the mental defectives, people that have an actual mental disorder that don't actually need to be listened to outside of being brought into a freaking psychiatrist's office in a straitjacket and having their non-existent fantasy debunked as being just that. And I don't just mean on the trans issue. I mean in just their worldview of the John Lennon style of, well, if we just have total totalitarian control over everything, then we'll all be equal. The pursuit of equality. You know, that's not my bag, so to say. That's not what I'm about. I'm about inequality. I don't believe people are equal. You know, if I believed in a God, they might be equal in the eyes of God. They might be equal in the eyes of the law. They're not equal in my view. People are not equal. The guy that works 110-hour weeks, that's a CEO of a major company, he's not the same as me. We're not equal. The person that works 0 hours a week, that it was just some gangbanger on the street like I saw earlier in the case today, he's not equal to me. Why would I listen to someone like that about the way reality should be when they are a degenerate criminal? You know, degenerate criminals are the characters we satirize. They're the characters that we laugh at. They're the characters that we find villainous. They're not the characters that we aspire to be. And yet, you know, this is the reality in which we live, in upside-down world, in, you know, invert world, clown world, where the cops are the bad guys and the criminals are the good guys. You know, lock up the cops and let all the criminals out of jail. That's what I say as someone that is an active participant in clown world, who's a progressive. But enough of that tangent. I want to summarize this commentary by saying that I will not force anyone to buy any games. I have seen other people, Jeremy from the Quartering as an example, who has endorsed but also not endorsed, say without saying, that you should pirate these games. I have a hard time not sympathizing with that view. Not in the sense of a principle, because I don't believe you should commit a crime. I don't believe you should steal anyone's work, and that includes video games. So I've never pirated anything that I didn't pirate for the sake of trying to get around DRM, which inhibited me from even playing the game. And there's many games. There's an entire list, I think, on Wikipedia, or maybe it was on Reddit, where there's a whole shitload of games that you can't play anymore because of DRM locking them down. And for the sake of being able to play those games, I do believe that you have no other choice but to pirate them. But in the case of content that has been censored or has been modified in such a way that in principle you can't buy it, you can't support the company that's doing it, and you wish to punish that behavior with your wallet, you know, I have to say that it's an alternative that I don't think that I'll really participate in, and I haven't ever really. Like I said, the only games I've ever pirated in my life have always been, and it's only been a couple, games that have been locked down because of DRM. However, I will say that in the comment section, I would appreciate giving me your opinion on Catherine Full Body in what I should do with it. And I mean personally for myself. Should I buy this game? Because I can't believe the Japanese developers continue to hand off these games to Western localizers in the Bay Area. It's always the same. Where they always censor their games. They always modify their games. And I get that, you know, Japanese doesn't translate perfectly to English, but the fact is that if there are Japanese references that don't make sense to an a Western audience, leave them in the game. I don't think that you should be making irrelevant jokes or, you know, your own boomer, millennial, progressive jokes instead of having just the Japanese jokes stand as they are, whether Western audiences get them or not. I don't believe you should be changing the jokes. You should just say the jokes, even if they don't make sense to a Western audience. And if you don't want to do that, don't translate it into English then, at least audio-wise. What I appreciated with Atlas with Persona 5 is just leave it in Japanese, that being the default. Because that's what I played the game with, and I appreciate that. Because your English voice actors that you hire for the localization teams always suck. They consistently suck. Even in Catherine, game I liked, and I will defend to some degree, still suck there. The voice actors that they find for Japanese localization are literally bottom of the barrel. Literally the worst of the worst, the most untalented. And yet they're hired over and over and over again. But in relation to the censorship of the game, the apparent censorship that I haven't actually seen confirmed from Atlas, and I haven't seen it, if that's true, if they did censor this game, should I buy it? And I'll leave it to you to determine that. I'll leave it to you to say one way or the other what I should do. Should I buy this game or shouldn't I? It's ultimately my decision. But I'm very curious what people's arguments are. Because it is something that I'm now neutral on, where I want to hear what people have to say. Because in principle, I don't believe you should be supporting these games when they're being censored. Because all you're doing is rewarding bad behavior with money. However, it's just the frustration of this is a game that I would like people to play because I think it's a genuinely good game, and I don't think that they have messed it up. Persona 5 is my favorite Persona game. And I've seen many people reflect that view, that Persona 5 is the best of all of them, although people have their favorites of the previous iterations. My point is, though, is that why should we all have what we want taken away from us for the sake of these people's choices, these people's decisions to censor this art? That being the other side of it. But in principle, like I said, I don't support the censorship, and I feel as though by supporting, in purchasing that game, I'm supporting the censorship. And I'd like to hear what you have to say below. As I said at the beginning in the onset of this commentary, even though I don't want to reiterate the fact that I'm right, this was important for me to cover for the sake of showing you that what I've been saying for an incredibly long time has actually reached the end result. We are now where I said we would be. Not for the sake of my ego, but for the sake of pointing to you the bleak reality of the situation, that as bad as things are right now, where every major so-called platform is acting as a publisher, no devs are talking about it. Name me a dev in the industry that is talking about this at all. Even a word about it. Name me one. That isn't like, Daniel Farver or whatever the fuck the guy's name is, who I haven't even heard of since he published his game. However long ago that was, last year. I haven't heard one word about him since. So that's one guy in the matter of like 7 years. If you got somebody else, point him out, because I haven't seen anybody. And we're talking about an industry that's across the world with tens and tens of thousands of employees. 0 people, near 0, approximately 0, are talking about this. What the fuck am I supposed to do about that, What the hell are we going to do? Seemingly there's nothing we can do. We just got to let the whole thing crash and burn. But it's unfortunate that in the time being that retroactively we're watching great games, at worst good games, being altered for the sake of people that aren't going to play them. Or have already played them, in which it's like, well, you're already stomached through it. You soldier your way through the fact that Erica in Catherine was called Eric, or whatever the fuck the name was. Because even though it might be a dude in a dress, it's still a dude in a dress. It's referenced in the game. Everyone knows in the game that Erica is just a guy. It's not even said whether she's trans or not, or if it's even, they say she. So there is a pronoun aspect. But for all we know, it's just a trap. And that's not the same as being transgender. And who gives a fuck about gender politics and gender? Gender politics, in essence, is accurately reflected in the game. It's a joke. That's my opinion of gender politics. It's a joke. And that's reflected in many Japanese games and entertainment. And if you take it seriously, you're probably someone that has a mental disorder. And why would we be listening to you? Go see a shrink. Go get yourself in an institution and right your mind. But we shouldn't be hearing from you about anything. You're like Boogie giving out life advice. Giving out advice on how not to be a fucking wastoid when he himself is a wastoid. You're like that. And what I'm always amazed by is just the amount of people that will listen to someone like that. Not to drag the guy unnecessarily, as white leftists would say on Twitter, but it's just the matter of your opinion is kind of irrelevant, and we have reached the end conclusion of what you've been calling for years. And I have to say that I can only anticipate that eventually this is going to hurt you. Eventually you're going to have a company that, for the sake of trying to be safe, is going to censor content that you like. And you saw a little bit of that with Nintendo, whatever it was with Smash, where they were censoring maps that had the trans flag in it. I think it was. People went epileptic about that, but it's like, hey, it's a private company. They can do whatever they want. Like, there's 100 examples of arguments that I can hand to you that justify the censorship of that being in the game from you, that you've used on other material. So, welcome to the world you created. Welcome to the bed that you are now lying in. The problem is that most of you fucking worthless pieces of garbage don't have the amount of money to, rake together to actually afford half these games. It's those of us that have disposable income and are eccentric enough to play many of these games that are actually dealing with the consequences and are now being put into moral quandaries of whether we should be even buying these games anymore, even if there's minimal censorship done to them, for the sake of principle of why are we supporting this conduct? You know, if the devs aren't even going to speak up about the censorship of their content, well, then it just leaves us then to make our, decisions personally, whether we decide to actually support this content or not, and in turn support that behavior. And I don't appreciate being put in that position. I really don't. I'd rather avoid it if I could. But I will leave it there. Thanks for listening.